There comes a moment in life when you stop running from yourself, when you finally pause long enough to notice the quiet truth behind everything that keeps breaking, everything that keeps repeating, everything that keeps hurting more than it should. And in that moment, you realize that the real problem was never the world, never the people who disappointed you, never the opportunities that slipped through your fingers. The real problem was how you saw yourself, how little you believed you deserved, how quickly you accepted pain as normal, and how often you settled because you thought, "This is the best I'm going to get." And that's the moment your life begins to change. Because self-worth is not just a feeling you carry inside you. It's the entire foundation of your decisions, your relationships, your boundaries, your dreams, your inner peace. Every choice you've made, every person you've kept, every heartbreak you've tolerated, all of it was shaped by the story you quietly believed about yourself. And when that story changes, everything else rearranges. I want you to imagine something with me for a second. Imagine the person you could become if you stopped abandoning yourself. Imagine who you would be if every single day you treated your mind, your energy, your heart with the same respect you give everyone else. Imagine if you stood up for yourself the way you've stood up for people who never did the same for you. Imagine if you finally understood that your worth is not something someone else gives you. It's something you reclaim, something you rebuild, something you decide. And that's the journey we're going to take together here. Not to hype you up, not to give you empty positivity, but to talk calmly, honestly, deeply about what self-worth really means, about why it breaks, about how it's rebuilt, about how, when it heals, your entire life shifts into a new shape. You stop chasing, you stop begging, you stop shrinking, you stop apologizing for existing. You begin to move like someone who knows their value, and the world, almost magically, begins to respond differently. Before we start, 1. Say this out loud or write it in your notes. 1% today. I choose to rebuild my self-worth. And if this resonates with you, if this journey matters to you, take a moment, right now, to support this work with a like. And when the episode ends, share the 1% today habit you're choosing. It helps the message reach people who need it the most. 1. Understanding the origin of low self-worth. There's a quiet pain that follows you long before you ever learn how to give it a name. It shows up in the way you doubt yourself before you even try, in the way you apologize for things that aren't your fault, in the way you shrink around people who make you feel like taking up space is a privilege you haven't earned. Low self-worth doesn't appear suddenly. It grows slowly, invisibly, from the places in your life where you weren't seen enough, protected enough, valued enough, or loved in the language you needed most. And the truth is, most people carry wounds they've never paused to understand. Sometimes it begins in childhood, not always through dramatic trauma, but through small, repeated moments. Moments where your emotions were dismissed, where your effort wasn't acknowledged, where your needs felt like burdens. Maybe you grew up around people who didn't know how to love themselves, so they couldn't teach you how to love you. Maybe you were surrounded by criticism that felt like guidance, or perfectionism that felt like protection, or silence that felt like stability. And as a child, you learned to adapt. You learned to stay quiet. You learned to earn love by being useful instead of simply being yourself. You learned that your value had conditions. Or maybe your low self-worth wasn't shaped at home, but in your early experiences with people. Your first heartbreak, a cruel comment at the wrong moment, a friendship that made you feel replaceable, or an environment that rewarded you only when you achieved something. It's strange how one painful moment can echo for years, becoming the lens through which you see everything else. And the mind, once wounded, begins to build a story that feels like truth. I'm not enough. I don't matter. I should be grateful for whatever I'm given. I shouldn't expect too much. I'm lucky anyone stays. But here's the thing most people never tell you. Your original wound is not your identity. It's just the starting point of your healing. Low self-worth is not a character flaw. It's a learned response, a survival mechanism, a psychological adaptation that once kept you safe, but now keeps you small. And when you begin to understand the origin, not to blame, not to dwell, but to see clearly, you reclaim a power you didn't know you lost. Because clarity is the beginning of rewriting your entire inner narrative. And I want you to reflect on something quietly. If the beliefs you formed about yourself were shaped by moments where you weren't treated with fairness, love, or respect, then why do you still hold them as if they're the truth? That question alone can shake the ground under your old story. And maybe the most healing realization of all is this. You were never the problem. You were simply reacting to an environment that didn't know how to nurture you. And the moment you see that, you stop carrying shame that was never yours to carry. You stop confusing unkindness with truth. You stop calling your wounds personality. This is where rebuilding begins. Not with forced confidence, not with empty affirmations, but with understanding, with awareness, with compassion for the version of you that survived what you didn't have the tools to name. And maybe healing your self-worth starts with honoring the fact that you've always deserved better than the story you inherited. 2. How your beliefs shape your reality. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize that the world they've been living in isn't the actual world. It's the world their beliefs allowed them to see. And that realization is both liberating and terrifying because it forces you to confront a truth most people avoid. You don't respond to life itself. You respond to the meaning you've given it, the interpretations you've absorbed, the stories you repeat in your head without even noticing. Every belief you hold about yourself becomes a filter, silently shaping what you expect, what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you walk away from. If deep down you believe you're not worthy of love, you won't trust healthy love when it arrives. You'll question it, sabotage it, or settle for someone who treats you poorly because it matches the story you've known the longest. And if you believe you're not capable, you'll avoid opportunities, not because you lack skill, but because you've already decided the ending before you even begin. The mind is powerful, but it's also obedient. It follows the narrative you give it. Tell it you're undeserving, and it will find evidence everywhere to confirm it. Tell it you're not enough, and it will magnify every flaw, every mistake, every insecurity, until the world feels like a mirror reflecting only your weaknesses. This is why two people can live the same experience and walk away with entirely different realities, because reality is filtered through belief. And maybe the most honest truth is this: you don't experience life as it is, you experience life as you are. Think about how many times you talked yourself out of something before life even had a chance to respond. How many times you expected rejection and acted shy, guarded, or withdrawn, making the rejection feel inevitable. How many times you believed someone was out of your league, so you treated yourself like you didn't belong. How many times you assumed failure before you started, and so you approached the goal with hesitation instead of presence, and the result matched your fear. Psychologists sometimes call this a self-fulfilling prophecy, but in simpler terms, it means this: Your life rearranges itself to match the story you're telling. If your beliefs are small, your world becomes small. If your beliefs are harsh, your life feels harsh. If your beliefs are compassionate, your life becomes gentler. If your beliefs are empowering, your life expands. But beliefs aren't built from logic. They're built from repetition, from experiences that left impressions, from moments where you felt powerless or invisible, from everyday patterns that quietly shaped your sense of what is possible and what is not. That's why changing them isn't as simple as saying, "I choose confidence." You can't outspeak a belief you never healed, but you can question it. You can interrupt it. You can look at it directly and ask, whose voice is this, really? Mine or someone else's? Because here's the truth most people never hear. Many of the beliefs you struggle with today were never born from your own mind. They were inherited from parents who didn't know better, from a culture obsessed with comparison, from past relationships where someone projected their insecurities onto you, from failures you experienced before you learned how to fail with grace. None of these represent your actual worth. They just became familiar, and the mind tends to trust whatever feels familiar, even when it's hurting you. Healing your self-worth means rewriting these beliefs, slowly, intentionally, with awareness, until your mind stops working against you and begins working for you. It means understanding that every belief you hold is a choice, even if it didn't feel like one when you first learned it. And maybe the most freeing realization is this: your beliefs created the version of you that survived, but they don't have to define the version of you that will thrive. 3. The subtle ways you sabotage your own life. There's a quiet tragedy that happens when someone with a wounded sense of worth begins to build their life. They don't ruin things loudly, they ruin them silently. Not with big mistakes, but with tiny, almost invisible choices that drift them away from the life they could have lived. And the hardest part is, most of the sabotage doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like protection, caution, humility, or being realistic. But if you look closely, you start to see a pattern of choosing less than what you deserve, because somewhere inside you, you still don't believe you're allowed more. Self-sabotage often begins in thoughts so familiar you don't question them. You tell yourself you're not ready, so you delay opportunities that were meant for you. You tell yourself someone like you shouldn't ask for more, so you settle for whatever is offered. You convince yourself that peace is better than risk, so you stay in situations that drain you quietly. And each time you do that, your life becomes slightly smaller, your dreams slightly further, your heart slightly heavier. But you call it being careful, because admitting the truth hurts too much. You're not protecting yourself, you're limiting yourself. And then there's the sabotage that shows up in relationships. You ignore red flags because you're afraid you won't find better. You overgive because you think affection has to be earned. You stay silent when your boundaries are crossed because your fear of conflict is stronger than your belief in your worth. You choose partners who match your insecurity, not your potential. You cling to people who give you crumbs because deep down you think crumbs are all you get. And if someone finally treats you well, you panic, you overthink, you pull away. You tell yourself it's too good to be true, not realizing that it only feels that way because you've never seen yourself through the eyes of someone who values you. Self-sabotage also appears in your habits, the things you do every day without thinking. You procrastinate on the goals that would elevate you. You exhaust yourself helping others, but neglect your own needs. You numb your mind with distractions because silence might force you to face the truth. You keep your dreams as fantasies instead of plans, because planning makes failure real, and someone who feels unworthy would rather live with a dream that never happens than a dream that tries and breaks. And maybe the most subtle sabotage of all is this: you reject yourself before the world ever gets a chance to choose you. You talk yourself out of opportunities. You hide your talents. You pretend you don't want what you deeply want. You lower your standards before anyone else even speaks. You walk away from doors that were about to open, simply because you convinced yourself you don't belong on the other side. But here's the truth you need to hear. You were never sabotaging your life because you're weak. You were sabotaging it because you were taught to fear your own potential. And maybe that fear wasn't even yours. Maybe it came from people who abandoned their dreams, who lowered their standards, who stayed small their whole lives, and you absorbed their limits as your own. But once you see the pattern, once you notice how many of your choices were actually old wounds making decisions for you, everything begins to shift. Awareness interrupts the cycle, and the moment you realize, I've been holding myself back, not life, you begin to step into a new version of yourself, one who no longer ruins things quietly, but rebuilds them consciously. And maybe this is the first time in your life you give yourself permission to stop abandoning the future you're meant to live. 4. Stop accepting the bare minimum. There comes a point in your life when you have to look at everything you've tolerated, every half-effort, every half-love, every half-apology, every situation where you were asked to settle for crumbs, and realize that accepting the bare minimum was never a sign of patience or kindness. It was a reflection of what you believed you were worth. And when your self-worth is wounded, you learn to normalize things that should have never been normal. You start telling yourself, at least they stayed, at least I have something, at least they didn't leave completely, but at least is the language of someone who believes they don't deserve more. Someone who thinks that wanting more is dangerous, selfish, or unrealistic. Someone who learned early in life that asking for what they truly need makes people pull away. And so, you shrink your needs to match the comfort of others, forgetting that your own comfort matters too. Accepting the bare minimum shows up quietly. You respond to messages written with zero effort. You tolerate someone who only shows up when they need something. You stay in friendships where you carry the emotional weight. You say, it's okay, when it's not. You forgive without change. You excuse behavior that hurts you simply because you're used to being the one who loves more, gives more, tries more. And every time you accept a little less, you teach your nervous system that less is home. But here's the painful truth. The bare minimum is not a standard, it's a symptom of believing that you're easier to love when you're quiet. A symptom of believing that you're safer when you don't ask for too much. A symptom of believing that being chosen at all is a miracle. And when that belief lives inside you, you accept relationships that drain you, jobs that underpay you, friendships that use you, and environments that undervalue everything you bring. Not because you want to, but because you don't want to risk losing what little you have. You don't realize that the real loss is keeping people and situations that require you to abandon yourself. And there's another layer to this, a deeper one most people don't admit. Accepting the bare minimum feels familiar. It feels safe. It feels like home because it matches the love you learned early on. Inconsistent, unpredictable, incomplete. And that's the trap. You begin to mistake familiarity for compatibility. You start thinking comfort means right, even when that comfort is slowly eroding your sense of self. But something shifts the moment you raise your standards. You begin to see that effort isn't something you should beg for, it's something you should expect. Energy shouldn't be one-sided. Love shouldn't make you anxious. Connection shouldn't make you feel like you're auditioning for a role in someone else's life. When you realize this, you stop chasing people who walk away, and you stop clinging to those who only offer you the leftovers of their time and attention. And here's the part that feels shocking at first, but becomes liberating later. The moment you refuse the bare minimum, you lose a lot of people, and every single one of them needed to go. Because the ones who disappear when you raise your standards were only benefiting from your low ones. They were comfortable with the version of you who doubted herself, who apologized too much, who accepted too little. But the moment you choose yourself, the dynamic changes, and so does your entire life. And maybe the most empowering realization is this: what you ask for isn't too much. It's simply what someone who values themselves asks for, and the right people won't be intimidated by that. They'll match it. The bare minimum was never meant to be your normal. You were just living at the level of the belief you held about yourself. And now, you're rewriting that belief. You're choosing a life where love is reciprocal, effort is mutual, and your needs are not treated like inconveniences, but like truths that matter. And maybe, this is the moment you stop accepting less. Not because you're demanding more, but because you finally understand who you are. 5. Replacing harsh inner criticism with self-compassion. There is a voice inside you that has been speaking for so long, you might not even recognize that it isn't actually yours. A voice that criticizes you for every mistake, magnifies every flaw, and whispers in the quiet moments that you're not doing enough, not becoming enough, not being enough. And the heartbreaking part is that most people don't question this voice. They trust it, they obey it, they build their entire identity around it. But harsh self-criticism never creates growth. It creates fear. It creates shame. It creates a version of you that survives life instead of participating in it. And here's the quiet truth. No external enemy has ever harmed you as deeply as the enemy that sometimes lives in your own mind. That inner critic usually isn't born from your own nature. It's learned. It often sounds like the voices you heard growing up, the one who told you to stop crying, the one who expected perfection, the one who made you feel like your best effort was still not enough. Or it sounds like a past partner who pointed out your insecurities more than your strengths. Or it echoes the culture around you, a world that profits from making you feel inadequate. And because this voice arrived early, you gave it authority. You let it shape your self-image, believing it was there to improve you when, in reality, it kept you afraid of yourself. But when your inner world is governed by criticism, you begin to live in a constant state of self-defense. You watch every move you make. You punish yourself for things you would forgive in someone else. You overanalyze your words after every conversation. You replay mistakes like they're crimes. You push yourself harder, not out of ambition, but out of the fear of disappointing the expectations this voice has created. And slowly, you become exhausted, not from life itself, but from fighting an inner battle that never ends. Self-compassion doesn't mean letting yourself off the hook. It doesn't mean avoiding responsibility or giving up on growth. True self-compassion is strength. It's clarity. It's choosing to speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you deeply care about. With honesty, yes, but also with warmth, understanding, patience, and space to be human. It means giving yourself permission to fail without calling yourself a failure. It means learning from your mistakes instead of punishing yourself for them. It means recognizing that growth requires gentleness, not cruelty. And there's something beautiful that happens when you begin to practice self-compassion. Your entire nervous system relaxes, your decisions become clearer, your fear becomes quieter, your confidence begins to rebuild from the inside out. Because when you stop attacking yourself, you stop living in survival mode. You stop assuming the worst. You stop expecting rejection. You stop shrinking. You begin to reclaim your energy, your voice, your presence. You start noticing how many of your insecurities were nothing more than echoes of old criticism. You start realizing that the weaknesses you believed defined you were actually just signs that you needed support, not judgment. You start seeing yourself as someone worth protecting, not someone worth punishing. And then something even deeper shifts. The world begins to treat you the way you treat you. When your inner dialogue is harsh, you unconsciously tolerate harshness from others. But when you cultivate a compassionate inner world, you naturally raise your standards, not from pride, but from alignment. You stop allowing anyone to speak to you in a tone you no longer use with yourself. You stop accepting relationships that rely on your silence or your self-doubt. You stop confusing pain with love. You begin to understand, finally, that kindness is not weakness. It's power. And maybe the most healing realization is this: you have spent years trying to be good enough for others. But now, your healing begins when you decide to be kind enough to yourself. 6. Building emotional independence. There comes a quiet turning point in every person's life, a moment when you realize that your emotional stability has been living in other people's hands. Their approval lifts you, their silence shakes you, their distance scares you, their attention comforts you, their inconsistency confuses you, and without noticing, you begin to build your entire inner world on foundations you cannot control. This is the root of emotional dependence, and it is one of the most exhausting ways to live. Emotional dependence doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you were never taught another way. Maybe you grew up learning that you had to be pleasing to be loved. Maybe your affection was rewarded only when you made yourself useful. Maybe your worth was measured by how well you met someone else's expectations. Or maybe you experienced relationships where your emotions were dismissed, so you learned to anchor your feelings to the reactions of others. And slowly, without realizing it, your sense of peace became something you outsourced. But the cost of this is high. When your emotional balance depends on others, your identity becomes unstable. You lose yourself in relationships. You attach quickly, intensely, desperately, not because you're dramatic, but because you're trying to fill an internal void with external reassurance. You overthink every message. You read into every tone shift. You try to predict someone's mood so you can adjust your own, as if your emotional life should orbit around theirs. And the moment they pull away, even slightly, your world collapses, because you handed them the remote control to your self-worth. True emotional independence is not about becoming cold or distant. It's not about avoiding love or connection. It's not about convincing yourself you don't need anyone. Emotional independence is the ability to belong to yourself first, to hold your center, your breath, your inner peace, without losing it every time someone else shifts. It means learning to regulate your emotions from the inside, not the outside. It means understanding that love enhances your life. It does not stabilize it. And something powerful happens when you begin to reclaim that stability. The world stops feeling so unpredictable. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop forcing connections. You stop settling for people who give just enough to keep you close, but never enough to make you feel secure. You stop interpreting someone else's behavior as a reflection of your worth. You begin to understand that distance doesn't mean rejection, silence doesn't mean abandonment, and someone's emotional fluctuations have nothing to do with your value. Emotional independence also means learning to soothe yourself, to sit with discomfort without panicking, to recognize that anxiety doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something inside you needs attention. To pause before reacting, to breathe before assuming, to ground yourself before spiraling. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice, a quiet, consistent one. And the more you practice, the stronger you become. And as you strengthen this inner foundation, you begin to choose differently. You are no longer drawn to chaotic people. You are no longer entertained by inconsistency. You no longer chase the emotional highs and lows that once felt like love. Instead, you move towards stability, reciprocity, peace. Not because you're avoiding intensity, but because you finally understand the difference between intensity and intimacy. And maybe the most liberating truth of all is this: when you learn to belong to yourself, you stop being afraid of losing others, because you're no longer abandoning yourself in the process of keeping them. This is emotional independence, not isolation, not coldness, but a quiet strength rooted in the understanding that your heart, your peace, your self-worth are yours to protect, not someone else's to manage. 7. Why consistency builds self-worth better than motivation. There's a quiet truth people rarely talk about. You don't heal your self-worth through motivation. You heal it through consistency. Motivation is loud, emotional, exciting. It makes big promises, but disappears the moment life becomes ordinary again. But consistency is different. It's steady, it's quiet, it's unglamorous, and it's the one force that slowly convinces your mind that you're someone who can be trusted. And trust, especially self-trust, is the foundation of self-worth. Most people wait to feel ready before they start changing their lives. They wait for the right mood, the right timing, the right burst of inspiration. But the truth is simple. If you only act on the days you feel motivated, you'll spend most of your life waiting. Because motivation is a visitor. It comes and goes on its own terms. Consistency is a decision, something you choose with or without permission from your emotions. Low self-worth often comes from broken inner promises. Think about how many times you told yourself you'd change, you'd improve, you'd start the project, you'd set boundaries, you'd walk away, and then you didn't. Not because you're weak, but because you were relying on motivation instead of structure. And every time you abandon your own promise, something inside you loses trust in the person you are becoming. That's why consistency matters. Every small action you follow through on, even tiny ones, begins to repair that inner trust. It tells your mind quietly and firmly, I can rely on you now. And that reliability becomes the birthplace of confidence. Consistency doesn't look heroic. It looks like reading one page when you don't feel like reading. It looks like taking a 5-minute walk instead of a 30-minute workout you won't do. It looks like saying no one time when you would have said yes. It looks like setting one small boundary, writing one paragraph, waking up 10 minutes earlier, cleaning the corner of the room instead of the whole house. These tiny acts don't seem transformational, but they are. Because you're not building the habit, you're building the identity. And here's something powerful. Your mind doesn't measure the size of your action. It measures the reliability of it. Do something small every day, and your mind starts to see you as someone who follows through, someone who shows up, someone who doesn't need to feel inspired to do what matters. And when that identity takes root, your self-worth grows almost automatically, not from affirmations, not from external praise, but from the inner stability that comes from keeping your own word. People with strong self-worth don't feel confident all the time. They feel capable because they've proven to themselves repeatedly that they can act even when it's inconvenient. They don't rely on emotional highs to carry them. They rely on structure, clarity, self-respect, and small daily wins. Motivation gets you excited for a day. Consistency changes you slowly, quietly, deeply, in ways motivation never can. And there's another layer here, an emotional one. When you are consistent, you begin to feel safe with yourself. You stop abandoning your goals when stress hits. You stop betraying your needs for temporary comfort. You stop fluctuating between extremes. Your emotional life becomes steadier, your anxiety softens, your sense of identity becomes clearer. Because consistency builds proof, and proof builds peace. And maybe the most empowering realization is this: self-worth isn't something you feel, it's something you earn through every small promise you keep to yourself. When you choose consistency over motivation, you're choosing the version of yourself who will exist 6 months from now, stronger, calmer, more grounded, more capable. You're choosing a future where your confidence is not built on emotion, but on evidence. And that is the kind of confidence no one can take away from you. 8. Rewriting your identity through action, not affirmations. There's a moment in healing when you finally understand that you can't talk your way into a new life. You can't affirm your way into confidence. You can't repeat positive sentences enough times to erase the wounds you never addressed. And you can't build a strong sense of self-worth by simply hoping you'll feel different one day. Because identity, real identity, is not rewritten by words. It's rewritten by action. Quiet, steady, undeniable action. Affirmations can be beautiful, but they only work when your actions support them. Otherwise, they create friction inside you, a kind of emotional tension where you say one thing but behave in another direction. You tell yourself, I am worthy, but you continue tolerating disrespect. You say, I am confident, but you avoid every opportunity that requires courage. You whisper, I love myself, but you keep choosing people who treat you like you're disposable. And somewhere inside, your mind starts noticing the gap between your words and your reality. The mind doesn't believe what you say. It believes what you do. Action is the language your nervous system trusts. When you show up for yourself, even in small ways, your mind begins to update the story it's been carrying for years. Every boundary you set rewrites a chapter. Every healthy choice you make strengthens a new belief. Every time you walk away from chaos, every time you protect your energy, every time you choose rest over self-punishment, your identity shifts a little more. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Identity change is a physical process. It's something you embody. When you consistently act like the person you want to become, even before you feel like that person, your brain rewires itself around the repetition. Actions teach the nervous system what reality to expect. And slowly, your emotional life begins to match your behavioral life. This is why people who wait to feel ready never change. Because readiness is something that grows out of the actions you take, not something that appears before them. And maybe no one ever told you this, but it's one of the most freeing truths you'll ever discover. You don't have to believe in yourself fully to begin. You just have to behave as if you do, and belief will follow. This is how people rebuild their identity after years of self-doubt. They make small, steady choices that contradict their old story. If your old story says, "I don't deserve good things," then receiving good things with openness becomes an act of rebellion. If your old story says, "I'm not capable," then showing up 1% more than yesterday becomes identity reconstruction. If your old story says, "Love is earned through suffering," then choosing peace becomes a revolution. And something powerful happens when you start living this way. Your environment begins to shift around you. People treat you differently. Your energy changes. Your relationships upgrade themselves. Your standards rise automatically. Your opportunities expand. Because your actions create momentum, a slow, steady reshaping of your inner narrative. And your inner narrative shapes the life you build. Each day becomes a brick in the new version of you. A version who doesn't rely on external validation to feel valuable. A version who doesn't chase situations that harm them. A version who doesn't apologize for taking space in the world. And maybe the most beautiful part of this process is realizing that you don't need perfection, only presence, only commitment, only repetition. Affirmations try to convince your mind. Actions prove your mind wrong, and proof is what creates transformation. And maybe this is the moment you begin living as the version of yourself you've always imagined, not by speaking it into existence, but by behaving it into existence. 9. Relationships that match your healed self-worth. There is a quiet shift that happens the moment your self-worth begins to rise. Not a loud transformation, not a dramatic announcement, but a subtle, powerful change in the kinds of relationships you allow into your life. Because healed self-worth doesn't just change how you see yourself. It changes who you let near you. It changes what you tolerate. It changes what feels familiar, what feels attractive, what feels safe. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to outgrow the connections that once felt like home, simply because they matched your wounds. When your self-worth is low, you are drawn to relationships that confirm the story you already believe about yourself. You accept inconsistency because you're used to inconsistency. You cling to people who give you crumbs because crumbs are what you've been fed emotionally for years. You forgive too quickly because you're afraid of losing what little validation you receive. You become loyal to the wrong people because loyalty feels safer than abandonment. And the saddest part is, you confuse intensity with intimacy. You mistake anxiety for connection. You call chaos chemistry because inner turmoil is all you've ever known. But the moment your self-worth starts healing, your emotional compass recalibrates. Suddenly, things that once felt exciting begin to feel exhausting. The people who kept you guessing start to drain you instead of thrill you. The relationships that relied on your silence, your compromise, your self-sacrifice, your emotional labor, they become too heavy to carry. And without any confrontation, without anger, without dramatic endings, you begin to walk away. Because the healed version of you doesn't argue with your old life. It simply stops belonging to it. And with that shift, something beautiful happens. You start gravitating toward relationships with reciprocity, with effort, with presence, with emotional clarity. People who communicate openly instead of punishing you with silence. People who respect boundaries instead of testing them. People who show up consistently instead of disappearing whenever they feel like it. People who are gentle with your insecurities instead of using them against you. People who see your value without needing you to earn it. These relationships don't drain you. They regulate you. They don't confuse you. They comfort you. They don't feel like a battle. They feel like a quiet place to rest. And here's the truth many people don't want to admit. When your self-worth is unhealed, healthy love feels unfamiliar, maybe even boring. But when your self-worth heals, healthy love feels like home, finally. You begin choosing people who match your healed identity, not your wounded one. You become more selective, not out of pride, but out of alignment. You stop trying to convince anyone of your worth because you no longer believe it's up for debate. You stop chasing people who make you feel small because the healed version of you refuses to shrink for anyone. You stop settling for relationships that require you to abandon yourself. And the shift goes even deeper. You start showing up differently. You communicate honestly instead of anxiously. You express your needs without apologizing. You set boundaries without fearing the backlash. You love without losing yourself. You give without overextending. You care without collapsing. This is what healed self-worth looks like in relationships, a balanced heart, not a desperate one. And maybe one of the most empowering realizations you'll ever experience is this. When you raise your self-worth, you do not lose people. You lose the people who were benefiting from your lack of it, the relationships that remain, and the new ones that enter your life mirror your growth. They honor your peace, they expand you, they lift your spirit, they make life calmer, warmer, clearer. They are built on mutual respect, not emotional hunger. They are rooted in truth, not fear. They don't damage your self-worth. They reinforce it. And maybe this is the first time in your life that love stops being a battlefield and becomes a sanctuary. 10. When you heal your self-worth, your whole life rearranges. There comes a moment, subtle, almost quiet, when you realize your life is no longer reacting to your wounds, but responding to your worth. A moment when your decisions feel cleaner, your boundaries steadier, your relationships calmer, your goals clearer. Healing self-worth doesn't just make you feel better about yourself. That's too small, too shallow. What it really does is shift the entire architecture of your life from the inside out. Because when the foundation changes, the structure must change with it. The first thing that transforms is your inner world. Your thoughts lose their sharpness. Your fears soften. Your overthinking quiets down because you no longer assume the worst about yourself. You stop replaying old mistakes like a broken film. You stop apologizing for your existence. You stop analyzing how you're being perceived. Your nervous system, that constant buzzing tension you used to live with, finally starts to relax. And you begin to realize something profound. So much of the chaos you thought was life was actually the echo of low self-worth. Then your behavior shifts with it. You no longer chase situations that drain you. You no longer tolerate disrespect disguised as love. You no longer remain loyal to environments that shrink you. You walk away sooner. You choose yourself quicker. You say no without guilt. You honor your time. You keep your promises to yourself. And slowly, people around you begin to notice. They can feel the difference in how you carry yourself, even when you say nothing. Because self-worth is quiet, but it changes the room. And as your behavior shifts, your relationships rearrange themselves. The ones built on your old wounds naturally fall apart. The ones built on your silence disappear. The ones built on your overgiving fade away. This isn't punishment, it's alignment. Because the healed version of you cannot survive in the places where the wounded version once lived. And while that transition often feels painful at first, it's actually liberation. You are not losing people, you are losing patterns. With this new space, healthier connections enter. People who respect your boundaries, people who want to understand you, not use you, people who communicate instead of manipulate, people who bring peace, not confusion, people who value your presence instead of testing your worth. And you begin to see that the love you once thought was too much to hope for was simply unavailable at your old level of self-worth. Your ambitions change too. You stop dreaming small. You stop doubting every idea. You stop assuming failure. You start believing that your goals belong to you, not to luck, not to rare people, not to the chosen few. You begin taking action without waiting for permission. You apply for the job you thought was above your level. You start the project you postponed for years. You invest in yourself with a seriousness that surprises even you. Because when you believe you are worthy, effort becomes natural, not forced. And perhaps the biggest transformation of all is this. Life stops feeling like something that happens to you and begins to feel like something you are actively shaping. You become more present, more grounded, more intentional. You stop trying to escape your own mind because your mind becomes a safer place to be. You stop living for approval because you no longer need it to feel real. You stop fighting for scraps because you know abundance isn't something you chase. It's something you attract when you rise to meet your own value. And over time, without fanfare, without drama, you realize you've become someone you barely recognize. In the most beautiful way. Someone stronger than their past. Someone kinder to themselves. Someone calmer in chaos. Someone who doesn't break at the first sign of uncertainty. Someone who chooses peace because they finally believe they deserve it. Someone who doesn't fear endings because they trust themselves with new beginnings. And maybe this is the truth your old self never had the courage to imagine. When you heal your self-worth, everything in your life rearranges, not because the world changed, but because you did. When you look back at everything you've survived, everything you've carried, everything you had to learn the hard way, you begin to realize that healing your self-worth has never been about becoming someone new. It has always been about remembering who you truly were before the world convinced you otherwise. It's about returning to the version of you that didn't question their right to exist, didn't shrink to fit, didn't apologize for taking space, didn't negotiate their own value just to be accepted. It's about reclaiming what was always yours. And maybe the most comforting truth is that healing doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens in subtle shifts. The day you choose yourself instead of trying to impress someone else, the moment you say no without guilt, the morning you wake up and feel even 1% more deserving than the day before. It's all these small, steady choices that slowly pull you into a new life. A life where you don't chase people who make you question your worth. A life where your boundaries are a form of self-respect. A life where your peace becomes non-negotiable. Your relationship with yourself is the longest one you'll ever have, and for the first time, you're rebuilding it with honesty and care. You're learning to speak to yourself with more softness, to stand up for yourself with more clarity, to trust your own emotional signals, to walk away from what once broke you, and to choose environments where your nervous system can finally breathe. And even if you don't feel it fully yet, there is a quiet strength growing inside you, a strength that comes not from perfection, but from presence. And maybe, just maybe, when you look at your life months from now, you'll realize that nothing around you magically transformed. What changed was you, and that was enough to transform everything else. Because self-worth has a way of rearranging your reality. It rewrites the relationships you choose, the opportunities you pursue, the dreams you allow yourself to believe in, the peace you protect, and the standards you rise to. It builds a life that feels aligned, intentional, and deeply yours. So as you walk forward from here, take a breath and hold on to this truth quietly. You were always meant for more than the version of life you accepted when you didn't know your worth. And every step you take toward yourself, even the smallest one, is a step toward the life you were meant to live.